That is why Skorzeny became the most famous saboteur of the Third Reich. For the most part, most of his operations, despite their grand scale, such as the Operation Long Jump, aimed at assassinating and kidnapping the leaders of the Big Three. The attempts against Stalin, Roosevelt and Churchill during the Tehran Conference ended in failure. Nevertheless, 2 successful operations made him famous worldwide. In this video, I will share what the top German saboteur revealed about the Eastern Front, what impressed him about the Soviet Union and the Red Army, and the 5 main reasons he gave for why the Germans lost the war. In mid-1943, he managed to free the dismissed and arrested Italian Mussolini and deliver him to Munich. A year later, kidnapped the son of the ruler of Hungary. Miklos Horthy entered into separate peace negotiations with the Soviet Union. This forced Horthy to abdicate and hand over power to the pro-German government, under whose leadership Hungary continued fighting on the Reich side until the end of the war. It should be noted that the war ended quite favorably for him. Despite his affiliation with the SS, he avoided accusations of serving as a Nazi. He immediately began cooperating with American intelligence, which allowed him to testify at the Nuremberg trials as a defense witness, and in 1947 at his own trial, he was fully acquitted, albeit with some friction, but successfully passed denazification. He went into business, worked for Mossad, and even wrote 3 memoirs. In one of them, Unknown War, he literally laid out the reasons why, in his opinion, the Germans failed to capture Moscow in 1841. The account is quite interesting, as he was a direct witness to those events, and not even in the role of a super saboteur. His saboteur career began only in the spring of '43, and before that, he participated in the combat operations of the 41 offensive campaign and almost reached Moscow. On December 2nd, we continued to advance and managed to capture Nikolaev, located 15 kilometers from Moscow. During clear sunny weather, I saw through binoculars the churches near Moscow. He wrote in the memos. I will discuss the 5 main reasons related to Katsina in the overwhelming the defeat of the German troops near Moscow later. For now, I will talk about what he was actually doing there. Katsina was the son of an engineer and preferred something like his position. In 1920, he graduated from the Higher Technical School in Vienna with a scar crossing his entire strong cheek. He wasn't wounded during his special missions. This injury came from one of the student duels with rapiers. At the beginning of the century, dueling was a very popular pastime among European students, and he took part in more than 15 of them. In 1931, he joined the Anschluss and enlisted in the SA stormtroopers. 3 years later, he transferred to the Vienna SS regiment. He undoubtedly had leadership qualities. He distinguished himself during the Anschluss of Austria. He was arrested at President Miklas's residence together with Chancellor Schuschnigg. After Kristallnacht, the owner of a luxurious villa, vanished without a trace. Nevertheless, he continued working as a construction engineer. When World War I started, he tried to volunteer for the Luftwaffe. However, he was refused. He did not meet the age limit. He was already 30 years old then, and for flying, he was too big. He was 190 centimeters tall. Without hesitation, he joined the SS. He served as a military engineer in a reserve battalion in the SS Standarte, and under Hitler, he received an officer position in the SS Reich Division, commander of the automotive equipment of the artillery regiment. Marshals in France captured Yugoslavia victoriously with this division. When the invasion of the Soviet Union began, the division was included in Guderian's tank group. The BVP with Skorzeny passed through Brest and Yelnya. Smolensk Dachshell, after the tank group turned south of the Kiev participated in breaking the encirclement. On September 30th, Operation Typhoon began, the decisive offensive on Moscow.d. When it was set up on the outskirts of the capital and the Red Army launched a counter-offensive, Skorzeny developed cholecystitis at a very inconvenient time. He was sent for treatment at Yansk Hospital. He did not return to the front and apparently was not eager to do so. But in any case, this was enough for him to form his own opinion bounty. Later, I will explain why he received his highest award from the Reich, but now it's time to move on. He presents his list of reasons for the defeat. He has, by the way, 5 things. One of the most important reasons, as Skorzeny considers, is the confrontation between Hitler and the German General Staff. Hitler openly did not trust his generals, and they, in turn, considered him. a complete amateur in military affairs and a covert saboteur of his orders and decisions. The root of this confrontation goes back to the distant year of 1935, when Germany refused to comply with, related to its armed forces by the Article of the Versailles Treaty, and passed a law on all universal military conscription, the creation of the new armed forces of the Third Reich, decisive. It was not about simply renaming the Reichswehr to Wehrmacht, it was much deeper. If before that, the German soldiers and servicemen swore allegiance to Germany, which allowed them to stay out of politics and formally being independent from any authority in the country, now they swore allegiance personally to Hitler. This caused disapproval and dissatisfaction among the generals. In the sanctuary of the old Prussian system, the general staff of the land forces, a small group of generals were still wavering between tradition and innovation. Curctus, with reluctance, parted with privileges. For people like Beg and his successor Halder, it was difficult to obey a man whom some called the Czech corporal, considered to be from Kärzen. All this could still be endured if the dissatisfied did not engage in covert sabotage and they organized conspiracies that culminated in assassination attempts on the Führers in 1944. The military conspiracy. Skorzeny devoted quite a few pages, believing that it existed long before the assassination attempt, of active counteraction. Stalin managed to build a system that was completely subordinate to him, and unquestioningly, no conspiracies were formed against him, nor was there an attempt to physically eliminate him, even when the Germans were at the outskirts of Moscow. While it was decided to remove Hitler, when Germany was still, it was actually a much more benign situation. Russian generals were following orders. They were involved in conspiracies and betrayal, as often happened to us in the highest ranks. Positions, writes Skorzeny. For some reason, Skorzeny forgot about Lysov Maltsev, but oh well, this is just my note. If you read how the Reich's chief saboteur explains it, it may seem that he is a staunch opponent. He says that Stalin turned out to be much more far-sighted and wiser than the Führer. Having decided on the pre-war purge of the Red Army, Skorzeny fully understands the repressions in the army. In 1937, he believed that they were simply necessary. As a result, the Soviet military not only did not weaken, on the contrary, it strengthened the army. The Nazi saboteur even regrets that the Reich's top leadership did not understand this, and did not understand the massive purge among the military, carried out after similar mass executions among politicians, deceived not only Heydrich and Schulenburg. Our political intelligence was. She is convinced that we achieved a decisive victory, an opinion shared by Hitler. However, the Red Army, contrary to popular belief, was not weakened, but strengthened. The posts of the purged, commanders of armies, corps, divisions, brigades, regiments and battalions were taken by young officers or ideological communists. After the total terrible purge of 1937, a new political Russian army capable of enduring the fiercest battles, Skorzeny stayed According to Skorzeny, one of the decisive aspects of war is secrecy. That is, events that do not take place on the battlefields, but have a great influence on their course and the result. Incorrect information, or its total absence, leads to huge losses, both in manpower and equipment. It leads to deprivation and the death of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. As he claims, it was the Second World War that was a war of intrigues, to a much greater degree than any other. Most in the memoirs from Skorzeny were devoted to Admiral Canaris. Chaverson suspects him of working for the British and openly considers him a traitor. From the very start of the war and during critical moments, Canaris acted as the most formidable opponent in Germany, convinced Skorzeny. He provides several arguments to support his version. Canaris summed up Hitler's efforts and sent disinformation that convinced the Führer of the impossibility of carrying out Operation Sea Lion, the landings in Britain and IT. According to the head of intelligence, the German landing force will encounter 2 lines of fortified defense, which, if necessary, will be reinforced by the 19th Reserve Divisions. In fact, Britain only had Montgomery's divisions, which, along with the remnants of the Expeditionary Corps, fled from Dunkirk, abandoning equipment and heavy weaponry. Partly to blame for this is Hitler, with his decision allowing them to evacuate too, hoping that they would see it as a friendly gesture and agree to a peace treaty. Nevertheless, if the Führer had known the real situation, the invasion would have taken place from England. It would have been ended back in 1940, and there would have been no need to fight a war on two fronts, he believes. Skorzeny accuses Canaris either of complete unprofessionalism or intentional concealment of the real strength of the Soviet troops and their possession of new equipment. After the Soviet-Finnish War, Ottmar reported to the Führer the weakness of the Red Army, its total unpreparedness for modern counter. We did not know that the Russians in the war with Finland used not their best soldiers and outdated equipment. We did not realize that their hard-won victory over the brave Finnish army was only a bluff. It was about hiding a huge force capable of attacking and defending, which Canaris, head of Wehrmacht intelligence, was supposed to know something about. Complained about the intelligence chief, Skorzeny Deutsche, the new T-34 and KV tanks came as a surprise to the Germans, against which the Wehrmacht anti-tank artillery, which usually dealt easily with Soviet tanks, the BT and T-26 tanks proved completely ineffective. Romovikil had 2 Katyusha rocket launchers, and much more. As an engineer, he was most impressed by the equipment of the Soviet sapper units that allowed building crossings more than 50 meters long, and with a load capacity up to 60 tons. The Wehrmacht had nothing like it. Overall, Skorzeny both in professional qualities and in mental abilities and cunning of the head of intelligence. I spoke with Canaris 3 or 4 times, recalling Skorzeny, and he did not leave an impression. He did not leave me with the impression of being humane or exceptionally intelligent. There's some right about him. He did not speak with Canaris 3 or 4 times, recalling Skorzeny, and he did not leave an impression. He did not leave me with the impression of being humane or exceptionally intelligent. There's some right about him. At the same time, Skorzeny spoke very respectfully of Soviet intelligence. In his opinion, the Soviet spy network in Europe, known as SPACE, Red Orchestra, was created by committed anti-Nazis, worked very effectively, providing the Soviet command with information about the German strategic plans. Remembered Richard Sorger, who reported that Japan is not going to enter the war from the Far East near. 40 divisions were transferred to Moscow at the decisive moment. Of course, in the best traditions of German generals, Schörner could not help but refer to the terrible weather cataclysms in which they had to fight, forgetting. It is worth mentioning that the Red Army operated under those same conditions. It was no longer possible to write off the scores against Canaris, to have an idea of what awaits them in Russia. Intelligence data was hardly needed. It was enough to pay attention to geography at school, a little more than to studying Latin, to the creativity of Goethe, Schiller, and the foundational works of Geddes. Nevertheless, much of what they had to face for the Germans deeply moved their souls and became a revelation. Operation Typhoon began quite successfully and was progressing in full accordance with the plan. On October 4th, the Soviet armies began and were trapped in the encirclement, and 2 more near Bryansk. Further on, up to Moscow, serious resistance was not expected. There simply were no large Red Army units on this road, however. It began to unravel. On October 19th, heavy rains began, and Army Group Center got stuck in the mud for 3 days. The scene was terrible, stretching for hundreds of kilometers. A column of equipment where thousands of vehicles stood in 3 rows, sometimes stuck in the mud up to their hoods. There was a shortage of fuel and ammunition. Supplies averaging 200 tons per division were delivered by air. 3 invaluable weeks and a huge amount of material resources were lost. At the cost of hard work and grueling effort, we managed to lay 15 kilometers of road from round timber. We dreamed for the cold to come sooner, recalls Skorzeny. Actually, their dreams came true quite soon. Frosts hit on the night of November 6th to 7th. However, it did not get any easier because of this. When ammunition was finally delivered to the division from Skorzeny, everyone was disappointed with the fuel and lubricants, food supplies and uniforms. It turned out that there was no diesel fuel, motor oil or weapon cleaning kits. Starting the engines became problematic and the weapons were failing. Instead of winter uniforms, sets prepared for the African Corps arrived. They did not protect against the cold, identical ones selected by size in the boot, with horseshoes so beautifully sparkling in pure European boots, became the cause of mass frostbite. carefully studying the equipment of the brave Siberians. Captured at Podborodino, we learned that, for example, if there are no felt boots, then leather boots should not be shod, and most importantly, they must be loose and not squeeze the feet. This was known to all the skiers, but not to our supply service specialists. Almost all of us wore fur boots. Taken from fallen Russian soldiers, a brave saboteur wrote with sincere amazement. As I have already said, I was responsible for the regiment's vehicle equipment using cards. That is, his responsibilities included its technical condition as well, maintenance and repair. And here he says, she was ill. The rapid development of the German automotive industry had its downsides. Many companies were involved in production, who manufactured their skis and assemblies, constantly improving to withstand competition. Attempts to standardize led to nothing. The situation is complicated when equipment from occupied countries comes into the Wehrmacht, as well as from Germany's allies. There were far too many modifications within a single car class. In 1941, every German car company continued to produce various models of their brand, just as before the war. The large number of models made it impossible to build an adequate stock of spare parts. In motorized divisions, there were approximately 2,000 vehicles, sometimes 50 different types and models, although 10 or 18 would have been enough. Moreover, our artillery regiment had over 200 trucks and 15 models. In rain, mud, or freezing cold, even the best specialist, he couldn't provide quality repairs, complains Skorzeny. The result was predictable. According to him, when they were stationed near Moscow, they could shell it. But there was already a severe shortage of tractors for the guns. After the counter-offensive began, they simply had to abandon the artillery. Here, Katzin clearly contradicts Guderian, whom Western historians readily quote. Guderian believed that the German officer corps significantly surpasses the Soviet one in professionalism and initiative. Soviet officers supposedly could not perform a step without orders from above, intimidated by pre-war repressions. Katzin himself does not agree with him. The Reich's war strategy was better. Our generals had greater imagination. However, from the average soldier up to the company commander, the Russians were equal to us. Rather resourceful, gifted at camouflage. They resisted fiercely and were always ready to sacrifice their lives. Russian officers, from divisional commanders and below, they were younger and more determined than ours, supporting their opinion with Skorzeny. What remains is to tell how Skorzeny became a saboteur, after treatment in the hospital for his gallbladder. In the spring of 1942, he received, according to him, a light position in Berlin for the final recovery of his health. However, this could not continue forever, and by 1943 he began to understand that he would soon be at the front. He was very reluctant to go there, knowing he had little chance of survival. With Skorzeny, he tried to join the Panzerwaffe officer courses, which would have also given him the opportunity to spend a few months hanging around in Telu, but he was again not accepted because of his height. Fortunately, he was in excellent physical shape. According to him, he easily endured a 20-kilometer forced march, with full effort, and he shot without missing. Therefore, he gladly accepted the offer to transfer to the sabotage unit. He still went to the front at the end of the war. In January and February of 1945, Obersturmbannführer, that is, Lieutenant Colonel Skorzeny, commanded a regular unit in defensive battles. He was at the front for less than 2 months, but this gave the Führer the chance to award his favorite, the Knight's Cross, with oak leaves for his role in the defense of Frankfurt on the Oder. By the way, here is rare footage featuring him. Friends, this is the view of the war through the eyes of an enemy saboteur. Some reasons seem quite insignificant to me, and some are banal, like the weather, while others are quite curious, like with Canaris. But what do you think of his view on the event of that terrible war? And he forgot to mention the reason. Leave your comments and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss it. You know better who to send this video to. Bye. Bye, Mundi.